Welcome from the International Water Resources Association webinar to today's webinar, which is going to be focusing on global water security issues, governance insights for groundwater management challenges. We thank you for joining us today. The theme of today's webinar will be governance insight for groundwater management challenges. As we know, groundwater is an essential water resource, but one that is more difficult to quantify and assess than surface water. This webinar will showcase case studies on options for assessing and managing groundwater resources in different regions which are facing water supply challenges. The webinar will feature presentations by authors of studies that are documented in the third issue of the i-WSSM UNESCO Global Water Security Issues Series. Presentations will cover case studies from Mexico and Palestine. Today's topics will include the following: groundwater governance for conflict-affected countries, a governance panorama of an aquifer in the semi-arid region, Mexico, switching from stock to flow to achieve water security, the case of Palestine. Our panelists today include Aurelian Dumont, Program Specialist from UNESCO, Seo Hyung Choi, Program Specialist from i-WSSM UNESCO, Frida Cital from the University of Baja, California, Mexico, Eliana Rodriguez Burgueño from the Instituto of Engineering, University of Baja, California, Amy Hardberger from Texas Tech School of Law, USA, and Julie Trottier from the Research Center for the Organization and Dissemination of Geographic Information, France. As mentioned, this is a webinar hosted by the International Water Resources Association. IWRA is an international network of researchers and practitioners who work on a multidisciplinary range of water resource issues. IWRA provides global knowledge-based forums for bridging disciplines and geographies by connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, and institutions who are concerned with the sustainable use of the world's water resources. Allow me to briefly explain the format of today's webinar. We will have presentations from each of our panelists, and after that, we will jump right into the questions. So please put all of your questions in the Q&A chat box, and we will address them as we can. With that in mind, I would like to turn the floor over to our moderator, Dr. Mary Trudeau. Mary is IWRA's lead on water security and a member of the IWRA Smart Water Management Task Force. Mary, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Nevena, and welcome everyone to this webinar. This is actually the third webinar that IWRA has hosted, profiling the chapters in this issue of the Global Water Security Issues publication. So the GWSI is a capacity development publication and is available free of charge through UNESCO's online library. And there will be a link in the chat. So the theme of the publication is the role of sound groundwater resources management and governance to achieve water security. And within that publication, there are 3 chapters that we're profiling today, as Nevena mentioned. So the theme of this webinar is governance insights for groundwater management challenges. And as you see, the chapter authors will be focusing on some of the insights to groundwater management challenges. But before that, we will have 2 more brief presentations. Just to introduce you to the publication and UNESCO and i-WSSM. So to start off, I'd like to introduce Dr. Aurelian Dumont. He's a project officer with the Groundwater Sustainability and Water Cooperation section of the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program at UNESCO. So welcome, Aurelian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. So first of all, it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today, and I will be presenting, in fact, this presentation on behalf of my colleague Simone Grego, who could not make it today, unfortunately, and I thank him for the support in preparing this presentation. So my objective with this short introductory presentation is to draw some linkages between the work of UNESCO IHP on groundwater and the content of the publication we are presenting today. And noting first that the series is aligned with the UNESCO IHP objectives as it contributes to the better understanding of the economic, social, political, technological, and institutional influences on current global water security in connection, especially with to the SDGs and other global agendas. And also, this shows a great collaboration effort with one of our UNESCO centers, the i-WSSM, and one of our main partner, IWRA. So now quickly, I would like to look a little bit at the context in which groundwater appears as a possible solution, looking at some of the messages of the last World Water Development Report, noting first that globally, water use is expected to grow by roughly 1% per year over the next 30 years. And this growth is primarily concentrated in emerging economies and middle and lower income countries. And it is driven by increasing demands from the different sectors, agriculture, industry, and energy, but also municipal and domestic use. And in fact, combined with surface water scarcity, which is increasing also due to climate change, as we have many parts of the world have experienced in the last months. Water crisis facing humanity is in fact real, but it is interesting to see how we have also solution to that crisis, and especially looking at groundwater resources. Because while our reliance on groundwater will also definitively increase, there is still a full potential to be largely untapped, as you can learn in this flagship publication that I mentioned, this last World Water Development Report, the last WWDR. So, in fact, and this is in particular to explore the role of groundwater in these different contexts across the world. That this third volume of the series was designed as addressing the topic of groundwater, and in particular acknowledging that groundwater is critical to maintaining water, food, and energy security, and to fight against poverty, or for the creation of decent jobs, to socio-economic development, and to the resilience of societies and economies to climate change. And of course, last but not the least, it also plays an essential role, in sustaining our ecosystem, and sustaining healthy ecosystems. However, groundwater is often poorly understood and consequently undervalued, mismanaged, and even abused. And in spite of its overall abundance, groundwater remains vulnerable to overexploitation and pollution. So this is a little bit an illustration of, first of all, in terms of quantity, first showing so that the groundwater table is declining as a global phenomenon, as in particular, as much of the global food security in the last 40 years, especially, has depended on groundwater due to the way our food system is globalized. And for instance, there are many virtual water assessments that have shown this phenomenon. And the other pictures illustrate the challenges of groundwater pollution in different situations for different economic sectors. Of course, we have many circumstances that can generate pollution, but we know that it is, of course, very difficult to address once groundwater is contaminated. So this is another main challenge. And so just quickly to finish this introduction, I would like to remind that this year, 2022, is a special year for groundwater, starting with the fact that we had this the World Water Day dedicated to the topic of groundwater. Groundwater making the invisible visible as the theme. And throughout the year, UNESCO has been coordinating and organizing with many partners a series of key events related to groundwater, in particular aiming at conveying messages about the importance of this hidden resource for the next year UN Intergovernmental Water Conference that will take place in March. So you can see some example here, or some picture of some of the events. So to be continued, in fact, because you are all invited to join the UN Water Summit on groundwater that will take place on 7-8 December at UNESCO headquarters. But it is foreseen also in hybrid mode, so you can also attend remotely. With also the 6th December, we will have a pre-summit day devoted also to side events with many partners involved in that day. And this event will really culminate all what took place this year by unifying the statement from all major groundwater-related events into one comprehensive groundwater message for the UN the UN 2023 Water Conference. So with this, I will stop here and looking forward to the interesting presentation of today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Aurelian. And I'd like to remind everyone that you can post questions in the chat. And there was a comment about desalination, or a question about desalination that we might get to in the panel discussion. The focus is on groundwater, but everything's connected when it comes to water. So next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Seo Choi, who is the program specialist at UNESCO's International Center for Water Security and Sustainable Management. We've been calling it i-WSSM, if you were wondering what that stood for. So Seo is also a PhD candidate at Seoul National University, and his main research interests include climate change adaptation, the water energy nexus, disaster risk management, and urban water management. So welcome, Seo.
All right. Thank you very much for introduction, and good morning and afternoon, evening, and everyone. This is Seo Choi, and I'm a program specialist at UNESCO i-WSSM. And today, this is my great pleasure to introduce the global water security issues GWSI series on this IWRA webinar. So before I explain the global water security issues, I'd like to briefly explain what UNESCO i-WSSM is. UNESCO i-WSSM is an international center for water security and sustainable management, and it is a Category 2 center under the auspices of UNESCO. And we are located in Gyeonggi-do, South Korea, and the center was founded to support water security strategies for sustainable development against climate change for developing countries. And Dr. Dumont mentioned already a little bit, and we also sort of our primary focal SDG is a 6th goal of SDG, and we support to UNESCO International Hydrological Program, IHP, within the 9th phase. So UNESCO i-WSSM, we primarily focus on 3 areas: research, education, and international cooperation. And today, under the research sector, I'd like to explain our publication, the Global Water Security Issues Series. So the GWSI series, it's a co-publication of UNESCO and UNESCO i-WSSM, and IWRA was cooperated since the 2nd series. And it's an open access listed in the UNESCO Digital Library, and it aims to share the current issues and diverse perspective of water security over the global issues. And the general processes, we follow the theme selection and we of course call for proposals, and the selected papers are announced and it's through the peer reviewing before publishing. And the first series, the entitled Water Security and the Sustainable Development Goals, and it was published in 2018. And the second series the title was Water Reuse within a Circular Economy Context, and in total 34 authors were participated with 42% of women, female authors. Of course, it's a UNESCO publication. We follow the two strict UNESCO priority, which is gender equality and African priority. And the third series, today's theme, the role of sound groundwater resource management and governments to achieve water security, was released in the last year. And then in total, 35 authors with 43% of female authors and 23% of African authors were participated. And this year, we are in progress of publishing the current issues, which is water security and cities, integrated urban water management. And we are really close to publish the series, so please stay focused for further information. And the next series will be released with the title of Making Water Decisions for Climate Change Adaptation. The chapters including governance and uncertainties and MBS, land use planning, and knowledge, tools, and risk management, and education and public engagement. And so this was a brief explanation of GWSI series, and I will upload the link to the GWSI series in the chat room so that you can see and download. And if you have further information or further questions, and feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Seo. There's a question about whether or not the slides will be available. This session is being recorded, and it will be available through IWRA social media links and on our website as well. So now I would like to introduce our next speaker. So Amy Hardberger is the McCluskey Professor of Law and the Director of the Center for Water Law and Policy at Texas Tech School of Law in the United States. Her work focuses on the intersection of water and other disciplines such as energy and land management. Her academic writings focus on shared water governance, international water law, the energy-water nexus, water pricing, the human right to water, and sustainable groundwater development. So the chapter, Amy is one of the lead authors within the third series of the GWSI, and the title of her chapter is Groundwater Governance for Conflict-Affected Countries. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Mary.
That's it. Yes.
So as Mary mentioned, the chapter that I wrote and co-authored with Bruce is Groundwater Governance for Conflict-Affected Countries. And so the idea or the overview for what we were looking at is this sort of what we call the Groundwater Nexus Trilogy, or referenced as the Groundwater Nexus Trilogy. So really focusing on a case study looking at a couple of different countries in which groundwater use exists within a model that also includes conflict, natural disasters, and evolving economic development. So sort of really trying to understand how those two things, or those three things, come together. And so with the understanding that most fragile and conflict-affected countries have low development rates, high conflict rates, and high vulnerability to climate change. And so when we put these together, it can actually create sort of a feedback loop. And the way that groundwater is governed can actually dictate whether that is sort of a positive multiplier or one that creates more challenges. So groundwater in these like in many other countries across the world, in these countries in particular, can solve many of the concerns listed above while increasing food security. Of course, the other side of that coin is unregulated extraction can lead to these unintended long-term negative consequences. And so the two case studies that we worked on is Kenya, of course, in Eastern Africa, and Jordan. And the reason that we selected these countries is because they are in different stages of their development, and in some ways have some really interesting divergent ways to manage groundwater, but also some similarities as well. And so our goal was really to sort of think about what were the best practices within the context. And what they do share is the groundwater trilogy that I just mentioned. So this is obviously a very brief overview of the groundwater management in Kenya. But one of the things that Kenya has that I think is sort of important to mention that governs all of this is that the right to water is included in the Kenyan constitution. So everything that has come since then in terms of water policy is sort of to support that ultimate goal. So what Kenya has a highly deregulated or decentralized system where there is both the role at the national level for policy, but there is a high burden and expectation down at the county level for implementation. And that's where we get things like stakeholder participation and stuff like that. That's quite important in these areas. So the way that Kenya has it managed is they have actually separated providing water and wastewater, sort of the water and the wastewater utility side from the water management and policy side. And so that's what you're seeing in these two different rows. And then the cabinet secretary is obligated to create or revise a national water resource strategy plan every 5 years. And then it goes down to the county level. So you have this kind of iterative back and forth where you have this big picture policy guidance from the national government, and then you have this more local interpretation of what that means for that area, as well as implementation. And for all of us that work in groundwater, we know that this is often a highly localized, regionalized resource. It's going to vary considerably based on where people are, how that water is being used, and the actual hydrogeology of the water source. So key challenges in Kenya, we can't underline enough the fact that many Kenyans still don't have access to water. So that's still a huge goal of the government and something that's going to really affect the way that groundwater policy is being managed. In addition to that, there's a lot of missing data and aquifer understanding that is critical to really being able to effectively manage these resources. Conflict threats sort of are always there. Kenya just went through an election year, and thankfully it was not particularly violent, even though it was a contested election result. Rapid population growth is happening across Eastern Africa. And then, as always, the structure is often challenged by the implementation challenges, and in particular, lack of capacity. And that might mean that definitely includes the scientific data and things of that nature, but also actually people on the ground able to do the work. So we can contrast that to Jordan's groundwater management, which in many ways is quite different. Similarly, the water resources are considered the property of the state, which is also true in Kenya. But Jordan has overall a more centralized water policy, although more recently there have been efforts to decentralize it. So I won't go too much into details with this. As Mary mentioned, this will be available, and the paper goes into it at length. But so you have the Ministry of Water and Irrigation creating water strategy, and then a couple of sub agencies that are respond or answer to the Ministry of Water and Irrigation. And then, as you'll see on that bottom line, there was some decentralization a bit more recently that in an effort to assume a little bit more local responsibility. So Jordan's key challenges, a lot of their water already comes from groundwater. The biggest sort of difference between groundwater use in Jordan and Kenya is that Jordan has been using groundwater much longer and in a much bigger capacity. So they have significant over abstraction issues in Jordan where the aquifers are significantly dewatered. So I would say in terms of being able to, in utilizing groundwater, Jordan is much further down the road. And really what they're looking at is higher efficiency uses. There's some great examples of water reuse where, you know, one molecule of water is being used multiple times. So one of the reasons that we wanted to look at these two countries together is that in Jordan, you have this over abstraction, and then in Kenya, you have this groundwater development. And ideally, countries that are in that position, in the Kenyan position, and there are many, the hope is that through these best practices, they can avoid getting to this over abstraction issue. So, as I mentioned, some of the takeaways of the paper is that Jordan is really responding to over abstraction and focused on increased technologies and efficiency, as well as I mentioned, decentralizing the regulatory roles in order to serve that purpose. Kenya's system shifts from this top-down policy goal and to the local populations to figure out how that water should be used, which is, you know, particularly important. Common elements across the board for these two countries, as well as many others, are how are you going to get and use science and data? What are the functioning and effective governmental authorities? Are they in place? Are there implementation challenges? What is the legal framework clear? As our responsibilities, as was mentioned in the slide, although I didn't say it, in Jordan, overlapping jurisdictions can be challenging. Who's in charge of certain waters? So that's quite important. The need for public participation and sufficient funding to support programming, and that's where that sort of the institutional capacity comes in. And then, you know, in many countries, we have this added challenge of corruption and conflict, which can particularly challenge regionalized systems where you might have a lot of on-the-ground politics trying to influence where the groundwater goes and how it's used. So some of the best practices, again, this is a very short version of what's in the paper, is that when we looked at these two countries together, there were a few things that sort of rose to the top that were worth mentioning. One is it's critical to have clear goals regarding groundwater. So these can be set and committed to at the national level, but then the level of detail can be filled in by the regional users. And when we talk about clear goals for groundwater, I think that often people think about how much extraction is wanted or what the limit on extraction is. But our paper really encourages something a bit more detailed. What is the real role of groundwater in that area? So this can include having some technical and economic efficiencies of resource use set as a goal. Equitable access, we certainly see this in Kenya, that's a significant goal for the Kenyan government, is to ensure that everybody first gets access to sufficient and clean water. Protection of the environment, this is important in Kenya, this notion of environmental flows where you have a high wildlife population that is driving a large economic sector of the community. We need to make sure that that water is there for the environment, and of course the environment serves people as well. Safeguarding groundwater quality can be important. You know, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of what a country's goals might be, but it is important sort of to identify what, particularly when you have this decentralization, you need to be able to set very clear goals of what it is that the community should be aiming for. Another sort of takeaway that we came up with looking at these two countries together is that even if the general goals are set as a national policy, the detailed regulation and management really need to be able to reflect the physical and local economic circumstances of the local citizens. And so this is often why you might have some variation in groundwater, the specifics of groundwater regulation in separate areas. So to have the buy-in of the people is very important to make sure that you're meeting the local needs. So if it's a highly agricultural community, that's going to be a separate goal than if it's a municipality and et cetera. And so the need to involve local stakeholders is going to be critical, particularly as you're first building out a new regulatory system and changing people's relationship with the resource. So that's just sort of a quick overview. I'm happy to answer questions now, or Mary, if we want to do that, if there are any, if we want to do that later.
So there are a number of general questions coming in, but there is one specifically, Amy, questioning, maybe you have comments on gender groundwater related issues. And this person is saying, is that not a challenge both in Kenya and Jordan? Did you look at that aspect?
Yes, we did mention it. We didn't go into much detail about it. Of course, there's quite a bit written about it, but it is absolutely worth highlighting that this does not, groundwater access does not hit both genders in the same way. Particularly in Kenya, my co-author is the one that's a little bit more familiar with Jordan. I spend more time in Kenya. So in Kenya, you know, it is the women and also the children that are tasked with getting that water. So I would say a co-benefit, and maybe even the country can set as part of its goals for groundwater and access to groundwater to alleviate some of those inequities and ensure, I mean, we know that when young girls are not having to go get water, their education rate changes significantly. So you really, through water, we can change a profile of, you know, half the population, which is pretty incredible if you think about it.
Great, thank you, Amy. And I think hopefully we'll get to some of the more general questions about groundwater towards the end with our panel discussion. But right now I'd like to move on. So we have two presenters for the next chapter in Mexico. And the first presenter will be Dr. Eliana Rodriguez. Eliana is a researcher, professor, and the general coordinator of the Master and PhD Science and Engineering program at the University of Baja, California. And she's the discipline lead of the Hydrological Monitoring Binational Group of the Minute 323 of the Colorado River Delta Binational Science Team. And she will be co-presenting with Frida Cital. So Frida is a PhD student on environmental sciences in the Institute of Engineering at the University of Baja, California. She has a master's degree in environmental sciences, and she also has a Bachelor of Civil Engineering. So welcome, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, good morning, afternoon, whatever you are. We are very excited to participate in this webinar. Thank you to the International Water Resource Association for the invitation. We are going to present a brief part of the chapter called The Governance Panorama of an Aquifer in the Semi-Arid region in Mexico. My name is Eliana Rodriguez, and my colleague Frida Cital is going to present you this work. Our co-authors also send their regards. Okay. So as most summary of what we'll see in this presentation, first we will talk about the study area and some of the generalities of the study region. And then we will show the historical, social, and economical context of a brief diagnostic of the Mexicali Valley Aquifer, about the groundwater pumping and uses. We will present also the results of a groundwater sustainability and availability, the legal and institutional framework, and some examples of the management instruments, and then some of the conclusions and recommendations. And to talk about the Lower Colorado River Delta Aquifer, is one of the transboundary aquifers between Mexico and the US. This transboundary water resource between the United States and Mexico. This transboundary aquifer has been recognized by the International Aquifer Resources Management. It has an extension of near 30,000 square kilometers, which is a huge aquifer. The aquifer covers 4 states, in California, Arizona in the US, and Baja California and Sonora in Mexico. The map right here shows the location of the aquifer, the transboundary aquifer, which is delimitation, which was modified by Ramirez et al. In 2019. And what we can say about the climate in this region? Well, the study area is an Semi-Arid region, as we said before. The temperatures can reach more than 49 Celsius degrees, which is very hot, in summer, and 0 during winter, sorry. The precipitation is scarce, between 76 and 200 millimeters per year. However, the evapotranspiration is near 2,000 millimeters per year. In addition to this, the Colorado River Basin is in a persistent drought conditions. Historically, the lower Colorado River Basin aquifer was created due to the historical flows and the sediment regimen of the Colorado River and the marine sediments of the Gulf of California. This discharge extends through all the delta, which is all this area, creating a vast aquifer. The map in the left right here show you the basin of the Colorado River. And every point you see in this map right here is a dam over a reservoir along the river channel. In the graph right here, you can see the mean daily discharge in the northern and southern international boundary of the Colorado River, which is located in this photo. Right here is the Colorado River coming from the US. And right here, this is the area of the Colorado River in Mexico. As you can see, this discharge has been decreasing because of the management control and the hydraulic structures along the river. Right here is the Morelos Dam, which is the last dam in the river pathway. And the southern area of this region is the limit area. Along the time, as a result, this intensively control of the river, currently the water is no longer flowing to the river channel. Currently, Mexico receives water from the US, according to the 1944 US-Mexico Treaty. The water is received from Morelos Dam, and immediately this water is diverted to the extensively irrigation channels in the Mexicali Valley. The river, as I said, is completely dry in some other areas, and right here it has water because of the relationship with the aquifer. The river and the aquifer beneath in this extensive alluvial zone are the two sources of water in the region for more than 40 million people, the river water, and for some of the most productive agricultural valleys in the US and Mexico, as the Imperial, Yuma, Mexicali, and San Luis irrigation valleys. Talking about the Mexicali Valley Aquifer, this aquifer supplies water for 5 of the 6 municipalities in Baja California, and 42 agricultural valleys inside the Colorado River Basin irrigation district. According to the official documents of the National Water Commission in Mexico, called CONAGUA, the aquifer is overexploited, has saline soils and brackish water. Also related to groundwater governance, previous studies found a lack of national and regional water management, consequence of pure management practices by agricultural users, and the transfer of water concessions between different sectors and users, and the lack of systematic measurements of the water volume extractions. As mentioned before, the water extractions in the Mexicali Valley Aquifer has been never measured systematically, and groundwater pumping volume data are based on direct estimations. In the bar graph, as you can see right here, this is the years and the pumping volume, which is estimated, is not measured. We have some years where is no information available. These circle graphs show the groundwater users in the Mexicali Aquifer and the San Luis Aquifer, which is the administrative way to separate those aquifers, but is the same aquifer. It's part of the transboundary aquifer. The agriculture is the leading economic activity, also the leading water consumer. As you can see, is the 76% in the Mexicali Valley Aquifer. And the region is one of the most important irrigation districts in Mexico. The main cultivated crops are cotton, wheat, alfalfa, and asparagus. And the efficiency of conveyance and distribution of the major users is the agricultural user. is about 40% because more than 50% are considered as a distribution losses, which can be related to water evaporation, infiltration, or others. But we are extracting more than we are recharging. Well, now we will talk about the groundwater availability and sustainability. In this chapter, we estimate 2 indicators proposed by Wickles and collaborators, and we apply these indicators. The first one is the relative water demand indicator, which measures groundwater storage leach in a system and the outflow caused by groundwater storage and elevated rates of withdrawal in relation to a renewable supply. And the result of this indicator was 1.7, I'm sorry, indicating that the water use regimen is not sustainable. The second index, which is this one, is the storage change index, which measures the degree to which hydrological system has equilibrated with an imposed set of natural and human stresses during a specific period. Negative values of this index indicates conditions of storage depletion, and storage increment values indicates as are reflected as a positive values. In the case of the Mexicali Valley Aquifer, as you can see right here, the result was minus 0.35, which indicates loss of storage. This result is supported by measuring data that we have for some of the monitoring wells along the aquifer. And as you can see right here, in this graph of some of the monitoring well, there is a depletion on the groundwater depth. And the graph in this right shows a record of groundwater levels in the monitoring well. This increase in trend of groundwater depth has been since we have been monitoring by CONAGUA, and also we are working together in these past years. Approximately, we have been seeing a decrease of 8 meters in the last 9 years. And this corresponding about 0.5 to 1 meter per year. And I will stop right here and give the floor to Frida, who has worked very hard on the study of this aquifer.
So now I will talk about the legal framework. So the applicable laws regarding the management, administration, and protection of water resources are shown in the left image. As a republic, the states and municipalities there have their own laws too. In these, the activities by every governmental institution are well defined, includes rights and obligation of the government institution and water users, as well as the mechanisms of water management. Some of them include regulation for the protection of water quality. However, none of this regulation in force is specific for groundwater. So now, the institutional framework. In Mexico, the institutional framework of water administration and management is centralized. The National Water Commission, CONAGUA, which operates and applies the public laws in matters of management of national water, and it is the main water agency that provides management of national waters, and it is the main water agency that provides water concessions and supervises the protection of water quality. The International Boundary and Water Commission is the binational Mexico-United States agency that works with territorial limits, surface and groundwater, water quality, water sanitation, and others. Now, in Baja California, the Secretary for Sanitation and others, the Secretary for the Management, Sanitation, and Protection of Water is responsible for designing and coordinating the public policy on the management of water resources the State Water Commission, SEA, administrates the Rio Colorado Tijuana Aqueduct and regulates, organizes, and executes the water policy in the states. The State Commission of Public Services of Mexicali, SES, is in charge of attending the planning, construction, operation, and maintenance of drinking water and sanitary sewer systems. And in the Mexicali Valley, the irrigation district 014 is made up for 22 irrigation models. A model is a geographical area where water is delivered to users of the same user organization. These models manage, operates, and conserve hydraulic infrastructure for surface and groundwater and an irrigation network. So now in the image, we can observe all the institutions. So this inter and intra-institutional relationship do not always proceed in practice, and the decisions sometimes are unilateral. So now the binational cooperation, there is binational cooperation between both countries. For example, Guadalupe, Hidalgo, and La Mesilla treaties are focused on the territorial limits of the countries. And almost 100 years after the 1944 utilization of water of the Colorado, Tijuana rivers, and the Rio Grande, which establishes the amount of water assigned to Mexico and US, modification of these treaties have been implemented by minutes. And such as 42, which includes groundwater management provision as limit pumping in the both side of the border between Sonora and Arizona. Minutes 318 and 319, in which per first time, two countries provide water to environmental purposes. And finally, the 323 as continuation of the last minute.
We are going back for, so I will talk about a little bit of the minute 323 and 319, which is one of the best examples of binational cooperation using environmental flows, which Mexico and the US and several non-government associations are implementing water resource to the environments. And this also, it doesn't have groundwater as a first perspective, but it's also implemented some activities which are related to groundwater recharge in the area. As you can see in the photos right here, in the dry ridge in 2014, which was the post flow with the minute 319, this is the dry area that we see normally in the river. And right here is a colleague of TNC, Eloise Kendi, and right here is disappearing during the post flow, which was a great event. Every person has been in love with these environmental purposes, water uses. And I will pass also the floor to Frida to continue the presentation.
So now, several water management instruments are defined in the legal framework, particularly the National Water Law, for example, the national and its states hydraulic programs describes the strategies and line of action for public policies to achieve the adequate governance of water resources at the national scale. The main goal is to promote and strengthen the governance and governability of water. However, these programs are updated in each government period, so they are not giving continuity continuity to become established. The goals and strategies lack alignment with the management plan for the USA portion of the aquifer. The water concessions considers the aquifer current condition in terms of available volume and are valid for 5 to 30 years. And according to the law, it is not possible to extract volumes of water that are greater than the authorized volumes in the concession, but in the Mexicali Valley aquifer, it is impossible to guarantee that because wells don't have flow meters. And other management instrument is the Registry of Water Rights, REBDA. Shows this shows the name of the user, the use and the volume of water extracted, the location of the well, and the name of the aquifer. However, this information is not corroborated with the measurements of the volumes of groundwater withdrawn from the well, so it does not accurately reflect the actual information. Other management instruments in the Mexicali Valley aquifers, there is pumping restrictions since 1965. This restriction establishes that the capacity of the aquifers allow limited withdrawals for domestic, industrial, and other uses. It also indicates that no one may extract groundwater in the restricted area for pumping, that's called zona vedada, or modify existing uses without prior written permission from Conagua. Also, there is an integrated aquifer management plan made in 2013. Unfortunately, the plan is not public yet, and its contents are unknown, and it is not clear if it's already being applied. So the conclusion and recommendations, Mexico and the USA celebrate a cooperative approach of their hydro-relation on the Colorado River, highlighting the provision of water for the environment and hydraulic infrastructure. Although there are good examples of the binational cooperation, they are not enough to solve the long-term situation of the Mexicali Valley aquifer. Given the multi-jurisdictional shared resource, it is necessary to create a new integrated plan with specific indicators and metrics, which will consider the transboundary aquifer. Furthermore, additional funding is needed to support the creation of independent modern groundwater monitoring system in the study area, and to increase the technical and human capacity in local agencies and organizations. On the Mexican side, groundwater governance issues abound, mostly related to overexploitation of groundwater in the Mexicali Valley. Mexican laws and regulation of groundwater exist, but they cannot be complied due to the lack of groundwater extraction monitoring. Although the tasks of the principal Mexican water agency, Conagua, are well defined in the existing regulation, this federal agency does not have the financial and staff capacity to enforce the regulation entirely. A strategy that has worked partially to solve the lack found is collaborating with academic centers, such as the University of Baja California, using federal or other funding sources. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Frida and Eliana. There are a couple of questions. Again, there's some general questions, but sort of two groups of questions. There's some interest in the public participation for the management of the transboundary aquifer, and if you can comment on whether or not it's effective. So this has been asked by two different people, and one in Brazil, noting that the Granani aquifer has an agreement, but public participation is really important.
Well, there is a type of public participation, but not in a formal and an active way, because there is basin councils, which they have representatives from the NGOs, society, academics, other government independent organizations, which are part of the decision-making of water resources in Baja California. And there are several basin councils along Mexico, but there is no formal participation. Right now, there has been a movement of social participation in as a citizen watchers of the water resources implementation, which has been very great to see how they are getting involved. But in a last year, they create this organization. But yeah, we are on the way to implement this social interference with these water resources in groundwater management, and part of the governance issues that we have right here in the Mexicali Valley.
Okay, thank you. And there was a pair of questions from Rodrigo concerning why the transfer of water allocations in the Mexicali Valley aquifer is considered a problem, and on what basis groundwater permits are given, because it seems that the permits are higher than the recharge.
Yeah, so the water transfers is considered a problem because we don't know how much water is used for example, agriculture or for industrial use, and these transfers are not registered in the REPDA, so we don't know how water is used for.
And Frida's answer is because also there is no formal interchange within the users. So that has been a problem because it's not uncountable, the volumes of water that has been transferring. And also there is a non-formal water market, which as a user, or if you have a concession of water, you can sell it to other user. And then there is an administrative process to change the water use as agriculture to industrial, or agriculture to urban use, and also inside of the basin and outside of the basin, because the groundwater is used also for other municipalities in Baja California, not just in Mexicali. So that has been a problem because there's the accountability of those volumes of water, and the administration of changes of users are not formal and are not in a public information that we can share and see to analyze this issue.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. And again, we'll try to get to some of the more general questions during at the end of the our session when the panel convenes. So next, I would like to introduce our third chapter author. Julie Trottier is a director of research at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in France. Her research focuses on the social and political construction of the scientific discourse and the technical choices concerning water, as well as the manner they are enmeshed within the political stakes involved in water management. She's been working on Palestinian water issues for the past 25 years. So welcome, Julie.
I'm sorry, I was muted, so I had to stop the screen sharing to. Well, thank you very much for being here today, and thank you to Mary and all the organizers for organizing this event. Are you seeing my screen okay now? Thank you.
Yes, it's good, thanks.
Okay. And Mary, can I ask you, so we respect the time limits, how long may I speak for? Because being the last speaker, sometimes we have shorter time limit.
You have 20 minutes.
Okay, fine, thank you. What I'd like to look at with you is how we can rethink water security when we consider the paradigm that we function in, and we'll be using the case study of Palestine to illustrate this. The definition of water security changes a lot depending on the author we're reading. Cook and Becker in 2012 actually reviewed the literature on water security, and they found quite a few different definitions of water security. They showed that disciplines tended to define water security differently, and disciplines tended to favor different scales over which they defined it. For example, hydrologists tended to define the water security at the level of a watershed. Social scientists tended to define water security over a local scale. Development studies experts tended to define water security over a national scale. And they didn't look at the same things when they defined water security. Agricultural experts, for example, tended to look at the protection from drought and from floods, whereas law specialists tended to look at security in allocation of water, for example. So they said that, they concluded that we needed to look at water security in a broad manner, but to make this concept applicable for an implementation, we needed to define it more narrowly. Later, Malikian and al. Actually pointed out that the definition of water security depends on the paradigm that you subscribe to. They showed, of course, that they used the standard paradigms we're used to thinking of, the positivist paradigm, the constructivist paradigm, and the critical paradigm. And they showed that within such paradigms, water security was defined very, very differently. And they said they also emphasized the fact that these paradigms were not mutually exclusive. So defining water security on the basis of one paradigm didn't mean that another definition of water security was not useful or not necessary. Now I'll take you to Palestine, where clearly a water stock paradigm versus a water flow paradigm predominates. If you look at the Oslo Agreement of 1995, you'll see that there was a quantitative share of the water lying in 3 aquifers of the West Bank. You'll see on the map on the right-hand side that the Western Aquifer, the Northern Aquifer, and the Eastern Aquifer all lie within the West Bank and are all more or less shared with Israel. But the upstream part is inside of Palestine, inside of the West Bank. So you'll see on the map the blue line that goes north-south and does like a Y inside the West Bank. This is the ridge. So water trickles west of that line, east of that line, and north for the Northern Aquifer. And what happened in Oslo is that they literally divided this water in the same way you would divide a pie in pieces, saying so many millions of cubic water for Israel and so many millions of cubic water for Palestinians. Now, an important point that Amy made earlier is that she pointed to the fact that Jordan was at good practice of having many uses for the same water drop as it flowed before it would leave the system. Well, actually, this kind of water sharing, which is straight out of looking at water as a stock, doesn't allow you to see this. How many times is this water drop used again and again? And actually, most of this water is used both by Palestinians and by Israelis, because the upstream-wise, aquifer-wise, the West Bank is upstream for every single one of these aquifers. What happens if we switch to a water flow paradigm? Well, it allows us to define water security in a new way, which I submit to you as something that could be useful. You don't have to adopt only this one and only definition. As Cook and Becker already published in 2012, there are many, many differences in water security, but I think this one has some advantages and could be useful. I'd like to hear the other panelists and maybe the other participants on it. So we defined water security as a situation where water governance over all scalar levels ensures an interaction with the flow of water that is consensually considered equitable across all social groups, including vulnerable minorities, while also ensuring the long-term sustainability of the environment. Now, it doesn't sound like much because it's only 3 lines, but we really worked a long time before we reached those words. When we say social groups, we're not saying national groups, we're saying social groups. So it includes farmers, it includes family farmers, agro-businesses, it includes urban dwellers, it includes the poor, the rich, whichever way you want to divide a society along a certain line to identify groups. It includes ethnic groups, it includes religious groups, it also includes national groups. But to us, national groups are only one set of groups among others. So what do we mean when we say, let's look at it using a water flow paradigm? Well, if we look at water flows, we see 3 types of trajectories that water flows through. The first is a spatial trajectory. Water always flows through a spatial trajectory. Even if you're on a desert island, water will flow through space, even if there's no human interaction with that water. So here we're giving the example of water that flows on top of a mountain where it's captured in the glacier in snow, and then it flows along both underground and above ground. It flows downhill, maybe recharging a spring here, and then flowing further and further downhill. Now, the only example in this slide where water is actually flowing without human interference is when it recharges this spring. For the other examples, here's is a qanat. We have a lot of qanats in Morocco, or all the way to Iran. From Morocco to Iran, we have thousands and thousands of qanats in North Africa and the Middle East. They are nearly horizontal tunnels that will tap an aquifer under the mountain and bring it to land that is suitable for farming. It is entirely gravity fed. Now, this water, after it flows through the qanats and goes back, seeps back into the aquifer, may be gathered behind the dam, maybe producing hydroelectricity. Then the river will keep on flowing and will recharge the aquifer. Maybe it will be tapped for by a well, maybe for drinking water. Now, I'm no longer talking about a spatial trajectory here. I'm talking about an institutional trajectory, because wherever water is used, you will find that there will be a human institution that governs the interactions among human beings concerning that resource. And it will govern these interactions either among individuals or among groups. And these institutions may be foreseen by water law, or they may be informal institutions. That's how we define water tenure. So whether informal or formal, whether among groups or among individuals, the manner a social group will manage its interactions among them concerning water, that's how we define water tenure over water. So very often in this example, the water tenure over the spring could very much be an informal institution run by an informal institution. Then once water reaches this qanat, maybe once again we might have an informal institution once again made up by farmers. So they define the rules of who is a right holder, how can you be part of the group of right holders, what is the water going to be used for. Once the water reaches the dam, well, most probably here it will be an official institution foreseen by law, because a hydropower dam in general is managed by state institutions, right? And then once water reaches the drinking water well, who knows? It depends on your context. It could be a formal institution, a state-run institution. It could be an informal institution, right? So here, what I've just described is no longer the spatial trajectory of water. It's the institutional trajectory of water. Now, this is how we use the water flow paradigm. This is a methodology that's appropriate to look at water as a flow, because we first follow the spatial trajectory, then we follow the institutional trajectory, and finally we follow the sectoral trajectory. In this example, first water is used in agriculture, then again it's used in agriculture. Here it's used for energy production, and here it's used for domestic consumption. And why is this a paradigm shift? Because it allows a methodology where you will be able to spot all of the actors interacting with water. When you use the other definitions of water security we evoked earlier, as they were set according to a scalar level and focusing only on some aspects of water use and the importance of water, it made some actors invisible. It made other actors visible. Whereas here, when you follow the trajectories of water, you can identify all of the actors that are successively interacting with water. You can identify the scalar level over which water is important to them, over which they deploy their strategy. And you can identify the interactions they have one on the other, even though sometimes they don't even know the other institution exists. So coming back to Amy's point, where she said, Jordan, I'm sorry, I thought that point was lovely, it was really good. So Amy really showed that Jordan was making big progress because it was making multiple use of the same water drop before it exits the system. Well, think about how defining water security in this way and looking at water as a flow shows really big advantages, because it allows us to see, are we maximizing the multiple uses of the water drop, or could we do things a bit differently to maximize the number of water uses of this water drop before it leaves the system? I always test my students. I'm sure I don't need to test you, but just as a reminder, how many ways are there for water to leave the system? Only 3. Either it evaporates, or it's transpired by an animal or a plant. And yes, we are animals, so we transpire too. And the 3rd way is for water to reach the sea. If you know of a 4th way for water to leave the system, then I always tell my students, please tell me immediately, then I will tell everyone I know a Nobel Prize winner. So we looked at the Palestine case study. Actually, in this article, of course, there's more detail in the chapter. We looked at 3 different case studies. The first one was Farah Valley. It appears here in the map on the left. It's a valley that runs northwest to northeast. It starts just below Nablus city in the northwest, and it reaches the Jordan Valley in the southeast. There's a big difference in altitude from the north to the south, about 800 meters above sea level in the north, down to 200 meters below sea level in the south. And actually, traditionally, if we go all the way to about the year 2000, agriculture existed in this part, the brown part. I don't know if you see my little arrow, but you see the brown part in the middle of the map that says Wadi al-Farah. This is where water was used for irrigation coming from springs. There were a series of springs that fed a river going from the north to the south of the valley. And these springs were used thanks to common property regimes by essentially family farmers. And this water was entirely used thanks to gravity in between main irrigation channels that ran on both sides of the wadi. Now, Why did this change? It changed because starting in the year 2000, we had the second Intifada in Palestine. And at that time, investors started drilling wells, especially up north in the valley. They could do so because with the second Intifada, the Israelis didn't occupy the West Bank since 1967. I'm sure everybody knows that. That's why I didn't mention it. But they stopped very much going to this area. And at the same time, the Palestinian Authority was not very present because it was the second Intifada. It was an uprising. It was a time of a lot of clashes and a lot of violence. Basically, people managed to drill wells without permits. And so they drilled so many wells and extracted water. Why? Because this allowed multiplying the land that was irrigated, and they started irrigating land that was in a higher altitude than those irrigation canals. So if you use the water flow approach, you see that water used to follow a certain trajectory through the springs, and then it started following another trajectory going upland using drip irrigation and multiplying the surface area that was under irrigation. And so what happens is that a set of actors was dispossessed and another set of actors appropriated the water. Now, as you see in the picture on the right, this is a picture from 2022. So there's still a lot of land that could be quote unquote developed and put under irrigation. We have more land right now in this area than we have water to irrigate it. So of course, people are still happy to drill wells and try to expand their irrigation networks. But there's a price to be paid for that. The price is that this river doesn't flow anymore. It's been completely dried because when you pump groundwater, it is linked to surface water, right? You cannot ignore one or the other. Now, the situation became more complex in 2010 when the Palestinian Authority actually granted permits after the fact to those wells that had been initially drilled without permits. So we have two sets of actors claiming the same water because the first set of actors had water tenure over these springs and their water rights are actually recorded in the land deeds. This is a part of Palestine where we have land deeds for every bit of land because Jordan, when it was responsible for the West Bank from 1950 to until it relinquished all administrative link with the West Bank in 1984, I believe, but it stopped being present because the area was occupied by Israel in 1967. But during the time when Jordan was ruling the West Bank, it managed to do the land and water settlement process, and it recorded the water rights for these springs in writing on the land deeds. So we have two social groups claiming the same water with legal means. One has permits for the wells, and the others have water rights written on the land deeds for the springs. So how do you build water security for the population in such a case? Well, there is a bit of hope because East Naples is, their wastewater treatment plant should be built in East Naples. And there's a choice to be made with how are we going to be using this treated wastewater. The authors that produced this map already back in 2006 argued that we should bring this treated wastewater to the recharge zones of the springs so that they would flow again, and this would allow the right holders to those springs to access water again according to their rights. Another, of course, set of actors, namely agribusinesses mostly located in the Jordan Valley, are really lobbying to get this treated wastewater for irrigation, especially of date palm trees. Now, if we do this, if the treated wastewater goes to the Jordan Valley for date palm tree cultivation, The problem is that this is minimizing the number of times the water drops will be used, because it'll go straight from the treatment, the wastewater treatment plant at about 700 meters above sea level, down to the medjool dates, trees that are cultivated below sea level, and it will be used only once, because it will be used through drip irrigation, maximizing transpiration by the trees. So that would minimize the number of times that water drop would be used. And it's called a reuse project. And often on paper, it appears to be a good project. But when you analyze it in terms of the water flow, a methodology using a paradigm of water flow, and according to our definition of water security, you realize that you can achieve much better water security if you consider the entire flow of water. So another case study we had was the wastewater reuse in West Naples. I'm sorry, my slides go too fast.
Sorry,
Here,
Julie, we'll have to wrap up quite soon. We've only got a couple of minutes left.
yes, I see my timer tells me 20 minutes and 23 seconds. I'm sorry. I prefer, these are complex issues, so I preferred going in depth. Am I allowed one more minute, Mary?
Maybe. Just if you could wrap up.
Okay. Well, simply the other two examples we had concerned wastewater reuse in West Naples, where here wastewater is flowing into Israel, and the Palestinian Authority has to pay a hefty bill because of that wastewater flowing into Israel. So the idea here with this project was to maximize evapotranspiration through plants so that at least amount of wastewater would flow into Israel to minimize that bill. But once again, this is good for one actor, the Palestinian Authority, but there's a whole set of actors that are losing out, because once again, we're minimizing the number of times that water drop is used. And I'll leave case number 3 as a big mystery, because I have to wrap up. But if you want to read about it, the chapter is free online on the UNESCO website. I thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Julia. And I'm sorry to have to hurry you through the latter part.
You did your job.
Yeah, I do encourage everyone to access the links that are in the question and answer and in the chat, so that you can see the complete chapters for all 3 presentations. We have a number of fairly general questions. One of the things that's been highlighted by the questions that have been posed, some of the general questions, is that there are definitely some gaps in information. So geographically, for example, Bangladesh, Nepal, there are no resources at our fingertips that we can direct you to. Some of the people who have asked about those. And I think we've heard from all of the panelists about the governance challenges. And so maybe just as part of our panel discussion, one of the underlying themes of the question is why is groundwater not governed adequately? And if you could each take a moment to highlight a key challenge and a solution, whether you can pick up on the need for governance structures, for monitoring data, reemphasize some of the points that you made, or pick different points. So maybe we can start. I'll open it to Aurelian and Seo to speak at any time. And maybe we'll go in the same order. So Amy, what do you see as a key governance challenge, and what would you recommend to people who are looking for recommendations to address that challenge?
Right, groundwater, it's such a precious resource, and then currently, even though it provides nearly half of total drinking water, it tends to get a less attention from people, and because the reason why it gets less attention is that it's it's underneath the ground, and people cannot see how much resource they have and how much resource they are using it. And for example, East Timor-Leste, they are using a lot of groundwater for their drinking water, but they don't have any infrastructure, any monitoring systems. So even though they are using it, they do not know how much they are using it. And so and these are the I believe that these are the main reasons that people get less attention than other resources for groundwater. So so it is very important to take a really deep into attention to the groundwater, and hopefully the government structures and any financial support should be implemented as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we can't change that. It's invisible, so we have to pay more attention. Aurelian, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yes, maybe a little bit to complement on this aspect of lack of visibility and also linking with some of the points that Julie developed, that in terms of flows, is that in fact the role of groundwater in sustaining also ecosystem, that's the when we have a recharge, so meaning a resource of groundwater that is potentially usable for different users, for the different economic sectors. We should not forget that what is entering the aquifer is also going out the aquifer somewhere, with also having some function for the ecosystem, for sustaining river flows. And so I think there is also a range of for changing the paradigm. There's a possibility of changing a little bit our paradigm when we realize that it's not only characterizing recharge and allocating the recharge of an aquifer to the different users when defining, for instance, irrigation rights or pumping right to different users, but really putting also groundwater again within the whole water cycle. And in fact, there are many concepts that are developed currently, such as circular economy, that we should really look at a broader perspective, replacing all the different components of the water cycle, which is this broader circular view to take advantage, in fact, of these different interlinkages. This is not because groundwater is flowing to an ecosystem or to a river that we should not pump it, but instead we should see how pumping this groundwater at some part of the year maybe can also generate positive interaction when using surface water at other period of the years. All these dynamics need really to be a little bit reconciled as compared to a view where we were seeing classically aquifers a little bit as separate entities. So this is like many implications also for governance, and as I was mentioning, also for water allocation, water rights, etc. So yeah, that was the point I wanted to make today.
Great, thank you. Yeah, everything's connected, and we don't see that more than through the water cycle. Amy, key challenge and a recommendation?
Yeah, I would just say that, one of the things as I listened to the different presentation that just sort of got a double underline is how regionally specific it is. And I think, looking at the questions, there's a lot of desire for sort of these overarching answers. I think the underlying challenge, no pun intended, for groundwater is it's the sort of the nature of it is so localized, both in terms of the resource itself, as was just being discussed, but also how those communities want to use that water. And so that, I think if you try to do a one-size-fits-all regulatory scheme, it will definitely not work. That's the one thing we know. So I think it's really more about these larger sort of like similar to the SGDs, like looking at these big picture goals. So establishing a set of outcomes, ensuring stakeholder participation in order to do that, ensuring that there's at least a portion of the regulation is regionalized. Otherwise, I think you're going to get unintended consequences. And that then allows also the science to come up from that regional participatory group so that they're talking about their specific unit. Otherwise, I think I think that so the inherent challenge is the independent and unique nature of these resources.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so water it's both global and also always local. So some of these lessons learned as part of the capacity development tool of the GWSI is to learn from the experience of others, but then apply it uniquely as needed in your own area or jurisdiction. Eliana and Frida. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I think one of the challenge is effective participation of key actors. So we have how to participation of all users, so the society, the politics, and all.
Also this what we have been seeing in the binational cooperation also is that we all have to be in the same page about the problem and about at first what we have been working in this aspect of the aquifer in the Mexicali Valley. We see that the basis that we don't have the data as we require to analyze and to do this. If we don't measure how we can management, if we don't know how much water is in the groundwater. So the basis is to have these measurements about the volume of water, and then start to see the users and how to integrate it, all the users as a whole, and don't see each other as competitive users. See each other as a team to management the groundwater resource that we have, which is very limited. And as all in the world, all the trend is to declining and higher demand, declining groundwater, declining surface water. So what we see in the challenges of governance is that this participation should be not just in one perspective of technical studies or social studies. It should be a multidisciplinary studies to do this. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the importance of interdisciplinarity, data, social, economic participation, establishing goals, I think, as Amy mentioned, also is really important. Okay, so I know we're a couple of minutes over, but I do want to also give the floor to Julie, and then we'll wrap up. So Julie, key challenge and destination.
Well, to me, we've got to start from the recognition that all water is already used, because all water is part of an ecosystem. So it's already used. And whatever change we make, we're simply taking water from one user and giving more to another user. And participation will remain a pipe dream unless we adopt a methodology that makes all the actors visible. And sustainable governance will be achieved only if we recognize that all those actors exist. And they are competitors. So we have to recognize that, I think. So I would love to have this dialogue with Eliana, because to me, what's important, better governance will be achieved if we manage to install negotiation among those actors that are competing with each other, so that we can achieve maybe an equitable sharing of the water, maximizing the number of time a water drop is used before it becomes either too polluted or it leaves the system.
Excellent, thank you. All water is already used. I love that. That's going to be my new catchphrase. So I would really like to thank, on behalf of UNESCO and i-WSSM and IWRA, our presenters today. And also you as the participants, thank you for your engagement, your questions. Please also access the report, and also this will be recorded so you can share it and link to it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, who I think is going to close out for today.
Yeah, IWRA would like to thank everybody for joining this webinar, and a big thank you to our panelists here on the screen, and also to Mary, our moderator. I know I definitely learned quite a lot from you guys, not being in the groundwater space, so thank you so much. And if you guys would like to continue the conversation, please visit our IWRA LinkedIn page or our social media sites. We'd love to continue the conversation that we had here today. In a few days, we will have posted the presentations that were presented, as well as the webinar recording. Please visit iwra.org/webinars to access those. We apologize that some of those chats were not in the chat box, but it's iwra.org/webinars to access all those materials. And on behalf of the whole IWRA team, thank you for joining us today.